This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel with a cattle market update. He explains what reactions he is still seeing from the past cattle on feed report. A discussion about a new management strategy with University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Dillon Fogarty continues the show. He says that changing the way people think about dealing with Woody Encroachment is important. Concluding today's show is Pottawattamie County farmer Glenn Brunkow on our new segment, Faces in Agriculture. Glenn explains what his operation does and some of his biggest challenges. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update. And this week, we're joined by Oklahoma State livestock economist Derrell Peel. Derrell, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
You bet. I'm happy to be here.
Kicking off our cattle market conversation with what are cash markets looking like?
Well, cash markets have, kind of struggled a little bit. We've had an awful lot of uncertainty generally in the world, and that's been reflected in a lot of volatility on the future side, and it does have an impact on our cash markets. So, fed cattle have been pretty sideways anyway, maybe just a little bit lower this last week. But, I think what's happening is the cash market trying to get consolidated for kind of what we would expect in the fourth quarter to see some strength. But we've got all this other noise in the system that's kind of holding us back. Feeder cattle market's kind of the same thing. We've got, obviously the general supply fundamentals are there. And really, at least as far as Oklahoma auctions last week, the calves were higher, but the bigger feeder cattle were down. That reflects some of the feedlot uncertainty that's going on right now. We've had some rain and some weather, which also has an impact short term and a little bit longer term when we think about what we can do with these calves.
And Derrell, you mentioned noise. And so what is some of that noise you're seeing in the markets?
Well, it really started a couple of weeks ago with the futures market kind of looking for a place to do a correction is the way I would put it. We've had such a run up over the last several months in futures. We had a massive long position in the market, which means that a lot of traders had a lot of money made on paper, but until they actually sell out those long positions, they don't realize, they don't capitalize on that value. So they were sort of looking for any excuse to call it a top, sell off a bunch of positions, and they did that, and that obviously then pulls the market sharply down. And it's not so much that I think the sentiment in the market has changed all that much. It's kind of rolling those positions up to a higher level. They're going to turn around and come back into the market, I think. And we're sort of seeing that this last week. We spent a lot of the week kind of trying to consolidate that futures market. I think we found the short-term bottom here. And depending on who you ask, they think that's either a temporary, slowdown in the decline, or it's maybe a bottom and we're going to go back up from here. So I think we have to wait and see whether we're done with all of this correction yet.
Is it fair to say then, still seeing some reactions from that cattle on feed report a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, absolutely. The last cattle on feed report did come in with a surprisingly large placement number. And so in the midst of all of this kind of corrective mentality, I guess I would call it, the market really capitalized on that bearish sentiment, and they used that to pull the markets down even farther. And, certainly it was a bit bearish in a short-term sense. I mean, there's more cattle on feed because of the placements. We actually took the October on feed number a little bit above a year ago for the first time in a year. We've had a year-over-year increase. And so the market didn't take that well. Now, what you have to understand is that the supply of cattle didn't change as a result of this report. So you really need to look into sort of where did those cattle come from that we placed unexpectedly, and what are the implications? And it's really two things, I think. Some of those placements were probably drought-related movement of cattle that may be marketed in September when they normally would have marketed in October and November. So there'll be an offset there to some extent. The other bigger part of it really was in that October report in terms of the heifers on feed number. So it's a quarterly number. We get that breakdown on October, and the number of heifers in the feedlot was actually at the highest level for October in the current cattle on feed data series back to 1996. So it's a huge October heifers on feed. The heifers represent 40% of all the cattle in the feedlot. And that means that the way we're able to hold feedlot inventories higher than expected is because we continue to place and feed heifers instead of using them for any sort of breeding purposes.
From those different markets, what is boxed beef looking like?
Boxed beef has held up pretty well. I mean, I guess you could call it as a general trend sideways, but actually this last week we saw some strength back in that market. And again, fourth quarter, I sort of look for that market to move a little bit higher. But, there's certainly fundamental strength in this market at this point. It's kind of bouncing around. I think we're widening out the choice select spread as we typically do this time of year. But, the boxed beef market is holding up quite well.
Derrell, as you mentioned weather, obviously you're usually in Oklahoma. However, today we're recording as you're in Nebraska. And so as you made that trek from state to state, what were you seeing from producers and how are they feeling about the recent weather?
Early in the week, last week, I did a meeting in southwest Oklahoma. It's pretty big stocker country. And the night I was there, it had rained that day. The sentiment was a lot of smiles on faces. And producers were basically saying, yeah, we're going to get some wheat pasture now. This rain kind of seals the deal. A lot of the wheat is late. It's in widely varying stages of growth. So it's going to be a little later than usual. But they were feeling pretty confident. And I think we are seeing more stocker guys, some of them had stepped out and taken the risk that they would get wheat pasture and gone ahead and bought some cattle. I think there'll be some others looking to do more of that going forward. As I came up to Omaha late last week, people that were coming into that meeting from around the Midwest, again, there was a lot of rain around. And so I think in general, we're seeing pretty widespread rains across the country that we'll see some benefits from in the coming weeks.
Is one of those benefits possibly, while probably not in the upcoming weeks, possibly some more herd retention as we look into next year or rebuilding those herds?
I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen much indication of herd rebuilding is just because of the uncertainty relative to drought and forage conditions. And, if the meteorologists are kind of right with the El Nino pattern, it looks like maybe this is the beginning of that from the way I understand it. We're going to have kind of a wet winter, maybe colder than usual, wetter in the southern plains, maybe not so much in the Midwest. But all of that suggests that we probably set up the idea for substantially better forage conditions next year, certainly through the first half of the year. And if that happens, then I do think we will begin to see more indications of heifer retention and herd rebuilding as we get into 2024.
And Derrell, moving now to looking at an article you wrote for Oklahoma State University's Extension's Cow-Calf Corner newsletter. And your article is titled, "The Ground Beef Market Gets Squeezed." And Derrell, what do you mean by that?
There's lots of ways to make ground beef. We use lean beef from cull cows and bulls, mix that with fatty trimmings from feedlot steers and heifers. And we can grind other muscle cuts into ground beef when we need to if they don't have a higher value somewhere else. But what I was looking at in that market is just the fact that as supplies tighten up for both fed cattle, but, as we go forward, particularly for the cull cows, we're going to see that market continue to get squeezed. The prices, so if you look at 90% lean trimmings, that would be your cull cow beef, basically. 50% lean trimmings from fed steers and heifers. All of those markets have been elevated in price. And, and I look at those in a ratio that kind of represents a standard sort of ground beef formulation. And so, even as we tighten beef production's down over 5% so far this year. And we think about how consumers are going to react to that. They may at some point, and likely will, try to utilize more ground beef markets or ground beef consumption relative to maybe the even more expensive middle meats. But what this says is that all of them are going to get more expensive in a relative sense. And so we are going to continue to see that squeeze. Part of what we use for ground beef production, because we don't produce enough cull cow beef for the amount of 50% trimmings that we have, is we also import lean beef. That's the driving force for much of our beef imports. And those are coming up a little bit this year. We expected that as supplies tighten in the U.S. and prices are high. So we're seeing some increase in imports. That doesn't totally offset the tight supply, though, so the squeeze will continue.
Derrell, you said cow slaughter numbers are down. However, dairy cow slaughter numbers are up a little bit. And so is that helping offset that decrease? Yeah,
the cull cow, the one slaughter category that's been up this year has been dairy cow slaughter. It's coming down on a year-over-year basis, but it's still above last year. So it offsets part of the decrease we're seeing in beef cow slaughter. In total, cow slaughter is down, but the dairy part of that is offsetting part of that. So again, that's sort of reducing the amount of squeeze that we're seeing right now. We'll see going forward. If the dairy industry has somewhat better economic prospects next year, then more than likely we'll see that culling rate also decrease. And that'll further exaggerate the squeeze as both beef and dairy cow slaughter at least hold steady to the beef cow side will continue to decrease. Dairy cows may cut back to less liquidation than we're seeing right now.
And how will consumers be feeling this squeeze?
Well, they're going to, obviously prices are going to ration a limited supply. And so as we go forward, I don't think consumers will quit eating beef. I don't think that they certainly, their preferences are changing where they don't want to eat beef, but the prices will make sure that we don't run out. That's one of the functions of markets is to price things so that people will decide not to eat it, but that doesn't mean they don't want to eat it. There just isn't going to be as much beef going forward. So we will see some rationing, and some consumers they'll eat somewhat less beef perhaps, but they'll change kind of what products they consume. They'll make all kinds of adjustments as we go forward in the face of these continuing tighter supplies.
And Derrell, do you have any final thoughts for our cattle producers?
Well, we're going into the fall, so a lot of calves moving right now, a lot of focus on whether these calves are weaned or not. In the auction prices, it's the fall run, and we're very much in the middle of it right now.
That was Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. In today's show notes, which you can find on agtoday.net, I will put a link to his article, The Ground Beef Market Gets Squeezed. If you'd like to sign up for this Oklahoma State University Cow-Calf Corner newsletter, I will also put Derrell's email in the show notes where you can email him to get signed up for it. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing management strategies for woody encroachment. And to talk about this, we have University of Nebraska at Lincoln and the Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources, Dillon Fogarty. Dillon, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
Dillon, woody encroachment, before we talk about kind of what those management styles are, could you give us a little bit of background about it?
Yeah, so woody encroachment is the process where a grassland transitions to a woody-dominated state. It's actually one of the top two drivers of grassland loss in the Great Plains, and it's occurring globally in our grasslands as we've removed fire from these landscapes, and we see woody encroachment as these grasslands are disappearing.
So something that continues to be more and more of a problem then?
Yes, absolutely. It's become more of a problem today than in past generations.
And so part of it, we were talking beforehand, and you mentioned kind of becoming proactive. And so what has it been in the past for trying to manage woody encroachment? Yeah,
so we've been battling woody encroachment in the Great Plains for decades. So nothing new there. In 2018, we had the rangeland analysis platform come to the scene, and that really allowed us to take a deeper look at our rangelands and what's going on. So we had, for the first time, had remote sensing data going back to 1986 to the present. And so we were able to ask questions like, what's the state of our grasslands? What's the rate of woody encroachment? At what scales do we see woody encroachment? Are our management plans working? And so we learned a ton of information over a pretty quick time period. And by and large, what it showed is we've been reactive on this problem. We haven't been keeping pace with woody encroachment. Our grasslands are slipping. Current strategies are unsustainable. And so it really forced us to think about what does a more proactive approach look like? And that's where this new guidance kind of stems from.
And so what are a few of those factors that make this approach proactive?
So with traditional brush management approaches, a few things. We've set thresholds where we wouldn't implement a brush management project or tree cutting, essentially, until 10% tree cover on the landscape. By that time, we're in the late stages of encroachment. Impacts have already occurred. The leading edge of the problem has gone way by with little chance of catching it. And so those approaches just haven't been effective. We've missed the front edge of the problem. So with these new approaches, we have a more spatially explicit approach. And what I mean by that is where we manage on the land becomes really important if we want to get ahead of this. So the goal there is to get out in front of the problem, secure those grasslands, and then work towards the problem. And so the mantra or the battle cry that people talk about is defend the core, grow the core. And so find those core grasslands, defend them at the leading edge of encroachment, and then use your brush management treatments and your prescribed fire to grow those core areas over time.
So taking the good and spreading it out instead of taking care of the bad and trying to keep it from getting to the good.
Exactly. We talk about it as, past approaches, we've been like ambulance drivers, and we're going to the worst areas. It's expensive. The chance of success is low. Now we're trying to transition to more primary care providers where we can do preventative health care, where we can work in our best grasslands, large intact areas that haven't had woody encroachment yet, or maybe they're just starting to experience it. Being able to go to those areas, secure them, and work from there.
And as part of that is because of seeds and seedlings coming from trees, realizing just how big of impact that can have.
Yes. And so what this new approach does is it actually breaks down the biological stages of encroachment. And so instead of focusing on just the mature trees, the seed sources, we look at where we have mature trees on the landscape, where we have contamination of seeds and seedlings, and then where we have those intact grasslands. And so by breaking down those stages, now we actually have a map or a roadmap to show us where that front line or that leading edge of encroachment is, which is really important for putting strategies like this into action. We have to know kind of the state of encroachment on the landscape. So new inventory approach, and that's one thing we talked about at the extension training today.
In grassland, something important to producers. And so what would you tell them to hopefully flip their mind and to bring proactive instead of reactive?
Yeah, we talk about seeing the problem through a new lens. So we talk about the lens of risk and vulnerability. Instead of seeing just a few trees, we tell people we should start to identify that leading edge, so where we see contamination by seeds and seedlings. We did research in the Nebraska Sandhills for eastern red cedar, and we found that 95% of recruitment occurs within 200 yards of a seed source. And so if you have an isolated seed-bearing tree out in a grassland, that's 26 acres of a contamination around that tree. And so when we look out into a pasture in the Flint Hills or at the Sand Hills where we have largely, some of our most intact grasslands on the planet, instead of seeing that intact grassland, we say, let's not forget about the contamination. We could already be managing woody encroachment when we have one tree on the landscape. We can manage it before we have one tree on the landscape, when we have seeds and seedlings starting. So getting our minds to focus on the early stages of encroachment to trigger our management rather than those late stages.
So how do people take care of that early encroachment?
There's a variety of tools. You have prescribed fire. The only thing that can control seeds, seedlings, small trees, large trees, woodland patches, the natural obstacle to trees in the Great Plains is fire. But you also have things like goats and herbivory that can target small trees. You've got hand tools that can get some of those small trees, haying, mowing, different approaches for tackling those small trees, but fire being among the most effective, definitely.
So still using a lot of the same tools, but just using them more proactively instead of saying, oh, no, I have too much woody encroachment on my field.
Yes. Thinking about what tools you have in the toolbox and how they fit into a management plan. So rather than saying, this is my tool, what can I do with it? Coming up with a vision for what you want the property to look like, and then saying, what tools can I use to get there?
And Dillon, this is something you presented on at K-State Research and Extension's annual conference, and to talk to extension agents to hopefully help get that into communities. But as we're talking to our ag producers now, what do you want to tell them about this?
I'd say talk to your extension agents, talk to your local NRCS office. We've have these new concepts out there. We're trying to get them to producers and put them into action. So reach out for more information. We've got a vulnerability guide that we produced a couple years back. We've just now produced a pocket guide. We've got working with extension offices across the Great Plains through the Great Plains Grasslands Extension Partnership. So reach out to your extension agent, NRCS, about more information.
And if people are wanting to find the pocketbook or the vulnerability guide, where can they do that?
They're available on the Prairie Project's website.
Awesome. Dillon, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about woody encroachment.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That was Dillon Fogarty from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in the Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. I will put a link in today's show notes where people can find that vulnerability guide. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Rod Bain and Kim Winter as they discuss Bat Week.
The final 8 days of October have been associated with the annual awareness campaign known as Bat Week. And as Kim Winter of the U.S. Forest Service acknowledges,
that was entirely intentional.
With the obvious connection of bats with the spooky season.
One of those iconic symbols of Halloween is a bat. So we decided to leverage that image of bats, but to turn the narrative, to turn it into something positive.
Meaning emphasis on the role of bats in various aspects of agriculture and crop development and protection.
Around the globe, bats are really well known for being both pollinators, but also nectar feeding and seed dispersing. And so they serve a really important ecological niche in doing those ecosystem services, as we call them. But here in the United States, they really just eat a lot of pests, so flying insects and moths.
Bat Week started out in 2014 with a small coalition of partners, such as the Forest Service, yet has expanded significantly in collaboration since then.
In 2017, we got the Secretary of Agriculture to proclaim it as a national week in celebrating bats. And what we've done over the years is develop an international coalition of partners, nonprofit partners, academics, museums, and federal partners across the Americas. So including Canada, the United States, Mexico, and through our Mexican partners, we've actually reached all the way into Central and South America, as well as the Caribbean. And so at this point, we have quite a number of people in our coalition celebrating Bat Week and spreading a positive narrative for bats across the Americas.
As far as Bat Week events, Winter says celebration of the importance of bats and the international coalition behind it continues to grow.
It's really just growing sort of organically from what started throughout the Americas. And so now we're seeing bat events and festivals in as far away as Nigeria and throughout Asia, where people who generally understand the role of bats in their ecosystem, they see them a lot more visibly than we do here in the Americas, would understand bats but maybe not want them around. And we're increasing that visibility through a series of partners that are also linked to our domestic partner here, Bat Conservation International. But through spreading the word, we're getting everyone engaged in learning more about bats, kind of understanding what they do for agriculture, what they do for rainforests.
To find out more about Bat Week 2023, including bat facts and Bat Week events in your area, go to this web address, www.batweek.org. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
That was Rod Bain and Kim Winter. We're now cutting to a short break on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show with a new segment called Faces in Agriculture. We'll talk with people involved in agriculture around the state about once a month and learn about their operation challenges and tools they've used to overcome those challenges. And today, our first person, we have Pottawattamie County farmer Glenn Brunkow. Glenn, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me, Shelby.
Glenn, to start off, can you tell us a little bit about your operation?
Sure. We're the fifth generation here in Pottawattamie County, just north of Wamego. My wife, Jennifer, and I operate the farm. Our two kids are involved. Both of them are grown and off on their own. We raise sheep, cattle. We have a fall calving and a spring calving herd both. And then we grow your normal commodities, soybeans, corn, milo, and hay.
Sounds like a very diversified operation. And with that diversity, what have been some of your biggest challenges?
You know, our biggest challenge, Pottawattamie County is one of the fastest growing counties in Kansas, population-wise. And so we're kind of on the edge of the urban sprawl. And so we're seeing a lot of the ground that we have farmed in the past be bought up to build up houses and people to move out on. And so, you know, probably expansion is the most difficult thing. And with new neighbors comes some new challenges too, like burning and spraying and those kind of things too.
What have been some tools you've used to hopefully calm down those challenges or just overcome them?
Well, what we have decided is to be a little more intense on the land that we own. We're grazing some cover crops and doing some things where we can run some more cows and more sheep on some crop acres, just trying to make the most out of what we have. We also started a direct-to-the-consumer marketing of all of our lamb, which has been really great. I really enjoy taking it out to the consumer, but it also allows us to produce more on fewer acres. We added the sheep because of that. It was an operation we could add in with the cattle and not necessarily add acres, but add some more income.
Is expanding to kind of doing some direct-to-consumer sales something that's been a key to being successful for your operation? Yeah,
it has. It's been a slow progression. I think we've turned the corner on the direct marketing. We've had one of the best years we've had. We started going to the farmers markets. We market online also, but it's been a way of adding another stream of income. Maybe a stream that, is a little more steady and not just once a year. And then that's been good. Kind of spreads things out.
Glenn, you've spent a lot of time in the agriculture industry with a lot of different jobs and professions. And so as you look back, what have been some of your favorite things you've seen in agriculture?
I spent 19 years in extension and served in Wallace County, Harper County, Pottawattamie and Wabunsee counties. And it was just fun to go from west to east and learn about agriculture. I sure learned a lot in those first 2.5 years in Wallace County and things that I brought back to my operation. We've went to no-till and trying to conserve as much residue on the ground as we can. And just some things that I learned back there. You learn that this is a big, diverse state with a lot of difference in precipitation and crops and farming practices. But the biggest thing that I've enjoyed is the people. I really enjoyed making those relationships and talking to people and finding out about what was important to them.
And so now, as we look forward, what makes you excited to continue to be in the industry?
Well, the most exciting thing is both of my kids want to have some piece of the operation in the future. And so to bring the sixth generation back, I think, is what keeps me going and keeps pushing. We're trying to add some diversification, trying to add some income streams so that we can bring another 1 or 2 people back into the operation. The idea that this farm will continue on, we've got one piece of property we homesteaded in the 1880s, and it's important for me to make sure that continues on into the future.
And Glenn, if people would like to learn a little bit more about your operation, where could they do that?
Brunkow Family Lamb. We have a Facebook page, and actually I have to give credit to my daughter Tatum. She's the one that keeps that up. I'm not very good at taking pictures and documenting what we do, but Tatum does a great job. Or they can just contact me or follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I do dabble in that a little bit, but I'm always open for somebody to get a hold of me through that, and I would love to tell you more about what we do.
Glenn, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us a little bit about your operation.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
That was Pottawattamie County farmer Glenn Brunkow. I will put links in today's show notes where you can learn more information about Glenn. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.